Um, I have a very uh, primitive setup here. I turned my sound off. I don't know why it made sound just now. Should not have done that. But welcome to a late night episode of Nate Reads the Classics. I'm streaming entirely off of mobile because I think the camera just looks a lot better than it does on my PC. So hopefully that'll lead to something much more enjoyable, and maybe it'll pick up more of my voice. As the uh, as the title says, I'll be reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. Reading it off an old phone here. I don't know what's in frame, sorry. Old phone instead of a computer screen, just so I can bring it closer or further away as I need to. I discovered that, obviously 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is already in the public domain, so that was no surprise. But it is being all of the pages of an old library edition, a paperback, are uploaded on Google Books for free, obviously. So you can just read it all that way. So that's what I'm going to do, because it gives the feeling of reading a paperback book. I hear the sound of my cat's tapping paws. As soon as I do anything where I would rather him not interrupt me, he seems magnetically drawn to me. So he might be jumping up on me and joining me in a moment. But as things go, I'm just kind of scrolling through the contents here. Oh, there we go. As with any significantly old, 100 years old or older work, if I come across any words, because I've never read this book before, if I come across any words that are, obviously anything against the Twitch TOS or anything that I just naturally wouldn't want to say myself, I would either say blank or say a substitute word that most people are pretty much going to understand, or I might just pause and then just move on to the next words. Hopefully that'll not be too confusing for people, because there's just some things I'm not going to say, especially not on the internet. So, yeah, here goes. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Part 1, Chapter 1, A Shifting Reef. The year 1866 was signalized by a remarkable incident, a mysterious and inexplicable phenomenon, which doubtless no one has yet forgotten, not to mention rumors which agitated the maritime population and excited the public mind. Even in the interior of continents, seafaring men were particularly excited. Merchants, common sailors, captains of vessels, skippers, both of Europe and America, naval officers of all countries, and the governments of several states on the two continents were deeply interested in the matter. For some time past, vessels had been met by an enormous thing, a large object, spindle-shaped, occasionally phosphorescent, and infinitely larger and more rapid in its movements than a whale. The facts relating to this apparition, entered in various logbooks, agreed in most respects as to the shape of the object or creature in question, the untiring rapidity of its movements, its surprising power of locomotion, and the particular life with which it seemed endowed. If it was a cetacean, it surpassed in size all those hitherto classified in science, taking into consideration the mean of observation made at divers times, rejecting the timid estimate of those who assigned to this object a length of 200 feet, equally with the exaggerated opinions which it set down as a mile in width and 3 in length. We might fairly conclude that this mysterious being surpassed greatly all dimensions admitted by the ichthyologists of the day, if it existed at all, and that it did exist was an undeniable fact, and with that tendency which dispossesses the human mind in favor of the marvelous, we can understand the excitement produced in the entire world by this supernatural apparition. As to classing it in the list of fables, the idea was out of the question. On the 20th of July, 1866, The steamer Governor Higginson of the Calcutta and Burnock Steam Navigation Company had met this moving mass 5 miles off the east coast of Australia. Captain Baker thought at first that he was in the presence of an unknown sandbank. He even prepared to determine its exact position, when 2 columns of water, projected by the inexplicable object, shot with a hissing noise 150 feet up into the air. Now, unless this sandbank had been submitted to the intermittent eruption of a geyser, the Governor Higginson had to do neither more nor less than with an aquatic mammal, unknown to them, which threw up from its blowholes columns of water mixed with air and vapor. Similar facts were observed on the 23rd of July in the same year, in the Pacific Ocean, by the Columbus of the West India and Pacific Steam Navigation Company. But this extraordinary cetaceous creature could transport itself from one place to another with surprising velocity, as, in an interval of 3 days, the Governor Higginson and the Columbus had observed it at 2 different points of the chart, separated by a distance of more than 700 nautical leagues. 15 days later, 2,000 miles further off, the Helvetia of the Compagnie Nationale and the Shannon of the Royal Mail Steamship Company, sailing to windward in that portion of the Atlantic laying between the United States and Europe, respectively signaled the monster to each other in 42 degrees 15 north latitude and 60 degrees 35 west longitude. In these simultaneous observations, they thought themselves justified in examining the minimum length of the mammal at more than 350 feet, as the Shannon and Helvetia were of smaller dimensions than all, though they measured 300 feet overall. Now the largest whales, those which frequent those parts of the sea round the Aleutian, Kulamac, and Umgalik Islands, have never exceeded the length of 60 yards, if they attain that. These reports arriving one after the other, with fresh observations made on board the transatlantic ship Pereira, a collision which occurred between the Etna of the Inman line and the monster, a process verbal directed by the officers of the French frigate Normandy, a very accurate survey made by the staff of Commodore Fitzjames on board the Lord Clyde, greatly influenced public opinion. Light-thinking people jested upon the phenomenon, but grave practical countries such as England, America, and Germany treated the matter more seriously. In every place of great resort the monster was the fashion. They sang of it in the cafes, ridiculed it in the papers, and represented it on the stage. All kinds of stories were circulated regarding it. There appeared in the papers caricatures of every gigantic and train. Hope that doesn't interrupt me too much. Of every gigantic and imaginary creature, from the white whale, the terrible Moby Dick of Hyperborean regions, to the immense kraken whose tentacles could entangle a ship of 500 tons and hurry it into the abyss of the ocean. The legends of ancient times were even resuscitated, and the opinions of Aristotle and Pliny revived, who admitted the existence of these monsters, as well as the Norwegian tales of Bishop Pontoppidan, the accounts of Paul Hegedy, and last of all the reports of Mr. Harrington, whose good faith no one could suspect, who affirmed that, being on board the Castillon, maybe? In 1857, he had seen this enormous serpent, which had never until that time frequented any other seas but those of the ancient constitutional. I'll pause for a drink here. I'm probably terribly mispronouncing a lot of those words, and I'm very sorry for it, but it's going to keep happening because I'm terrible at pronouncing a lot of these things. Then burst forth the interminable controversy between the credulous and the incredulous in the societies of savants and scientific journals. The question of the monster inflamed all minds. Editors of scientific journals, quarreling with believers in the supernatural, spilled seas of ink during this memorable campaign, some even drawing blood, for from the sea serpent they came to direct personalities. For 6 months, war was waged with various fortune. In the leading articles of the Geographical Institution of Brazil, the Royal Academy of Science of Berlin, the British Association, the Smithsonian Institution of Washington, in the discussions of the Indian archipelago, of the cosmos of the Abbe Moigno, in the Mitteilungen of Petermann, in the scientific chronicles of the great journals of France and other countries. The cheaper journals replied keenly and with inexhaustible zest. These satirical writers parodied a remark of Linnaeus, quoted by the adversaries of the monster, maintaining that nature did not make fools, and adjured their contemporaries not to give the lie to nature, by admitting the existence of krakens, sea serpents, Moby Dicks, and other lucubrations of delirious sailors. At length, an article in the well-known satirical journal by a favorite contributor, the chief of the staff, settled the monster, like Hippolytus, giving it the death blow amid a universal burst of laughter. Wit had conquered science. During the first months of the year 1867, the question seemed buried never to revive. When new facts were brought before the public, it was then no longer a scientific problem to be solved, but a real danger seriously to be avoided. The question took quite another shape. The monster became a small island, a rock, a reef, but a reef of indefinite and shifting proportions. On the 5th of March, 1867, the Moravian of the Montreal Ocean Company, finding herself, during the night, in 27 degrees 30 latitude and 72 degrees 15 longitude, struck on her starboard quarter a rock, marked in no chart for that part of the sea. Under the combined efforts of the wind and its 400 horsepower, it was going at the rate of 13 knots. Had it not been for the superior strength of the hull of the Moravian, she would have been broken by the shock and gone down with the 237 passengers she was bringing home from Canada. The accident happened about 5 o'clock in the morning, as the day was breaking. The officers of the quarter-deck hurried to the after part of the vessel. They examined the sea with the most scrupulous attention. They saw nothing but a strong eddy about 3 cables' length distant, as if the surface had been violently agitated. The bearings of the place were taken exactly, and the Moravian continued its route with apparent damage. Had it struck on a submerged rock or on an enormous wreck? They could not tell, but on examination of the ship's bottom when undergoing repairs, it was found that part of her keel was broken. This fact, so grave in itself, might perhaps have been forgotten, like many others, if 3 weeks after it had not been reenacted under similar circumstances. But, thanks to the nationality of the victim of the shock, thanks to the reputation of the company to which the vessel belonged, the circumstance became extensively circulated. The 13th of April, 1867, the sea being beautiful, the breeze favorable, the Scotia of the Cunard Company's line found herself in 15 degrees 12 long and 45 degrees 37 lat. She was going to the speed of 13 knots and a half. At 17 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, while the passengers were assembled at lunch in the great saloon, a slight shock was felt on the hull of the Scotia, on her quarter, a little aft of the port paddle. The Scotia had not struck, but she had been struck, and seemingly by something rather sharp and penetrating than blunt. The shock had been so light that no one had been alarmed. had it not been for the shouts of the carpenter's watch, who rushed onto the bridge, exclaiming, "We are sinking! We are sinking!" At first the passengers were much frightened, but the Captain Anderson hastened to reassure them. The danger could not be imminent. The Scotia, divided into 7 compartments by strong partitions, could brave with impunity any leak. Captain Anderson went down immediately into the hold. He found that the sea was pouring into the 5th compartment, and the rapidity of the influx proved that the force of the water was considerable. Fortunately, this compartment did not hold the boilers, or the fires would have been immediately extinguished. Captain Anderson ordered the engines to be stopped at once, and one of the men went down to ascertain the extent of the injury. Some minutes afterward, they discovered the existence of a large hole of 2 yards in diameter in the ship's bottom. Such a leak could not be stopped, and the Scotia, her paddles half submerged, were obliged to continue her course. She was then 300 miles from Cape Clear, and after 3 days' delay, which caused great uneasiness in Liverpool, she entered the basin of the Company. The engineers visited the Scotia, which was put in dry dock. They could scarcely believe it possible. At 2 yards and a half below water mark was a regular rent, in the form of an isosceles triangle. The broken place in the iron plates was so perfectly defined that it could not have been more neatly done by a punch. It was clear, then, that the instrument producing the perforation was not of a common stamp, and after having been driven with prodigious strength, piercing an iron plate 1 3/8 inches thick, had withdrawn itself by a retrograde motion truly inexplicable. Such was the last fact, which resulted in exciting more the torrent of public opinion. From this moment, all unlucky casualties, which could not be otherwise accounted for, were put down to the monster. Upon this imaginary creature rested the responsibility of all these shipwrecks, which unfortunately were considerable. For of 3,000 ships whose loss was annually recorded at Lloyd's, the number of sailing and steamships supposed to be totally lost, from the absence of all news, annotated to not less than 200. Now it was the monster who, justly or unjustly, was accused of their disappearance, and thanks to it, communication between the different continents became more and more dangerous. The public demanded peremptorily that the seas should at any price be relieved from this formidable cetacean. And that's the end of chapter 1. I'm going to take another drink, because that's kind of long. I have no idea how long this book is as a whole. Again, this is the first time I've read it. And I am Twitch streaming like this to hopefully build up a little more stamina for reading out loud. I am a writer myself. I wrote a book called Withered Kingdom. It's a fantasy novel. I just got it approved for hardcover on Amazon. So again, that's Withered Kingdom, is available on Amazon as an ebook, a soft cover / paperback, and as a hardcover. I haven't even seen the hardcover yet. It's been approved that recently, just yesterday or 2 days ago. And I ordered my first copies already, so when I do get those, I'll probably bring them onto the stream, or at least live stream them elsewhere and maybe share them around. But yeah, the hardcovers have finished production and are in print, which is really exciting to me because I have heard that Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing hardcovers are of a pretty decent quality, especially for the price. So that's exciting to me. Withered Kingdom is a fantasy novel that I wrote that basically combines the world of Lord of the Rings with a magic system like Avatar: The Last Airbender, and a plot like what's the book? Born Identity. I say that to myself a million times, and I say it out loud a million times. You'd think I'd have it memorized, but I don't. That's the story. It's about an angel who's forgotten his past. That's where the Born Identity part comes in. And he's fighting to find a way to peace. Unfortunately, it seems like the only way to achieve peace is to make it to the other side of the battlefield. So That's my book. You can find it now on Amazon. You can also visit my website, pyronianchronicle.com, to follow my blog and share my posts all over whatever social media you can. I am a self-published author. I'm doing it all from my own passion and my own wallet, so it's a struggle. So every bit of word of mouth advertisement I can get is hugely valuable to me. I will proceed to chapter 2 in a moment. That is chapter 2 of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, not my book. Although, if you do go to pyronianchronicle.com, that's pyronicle.com, you can scroll through my blog. Over the last few months, I've been uploading myself reading from my own book, and you can hear almost the entire book being read by me in a very non-professional Facebook live streaming kind of situation. Twitch streaming does seem to be a lot easier and more effective. So that's why I'm doing Nate Reads the Classics on here. Anyway, on to chapter 2. Pro and Con. At the period when these events took place, I had just returned from a scientific research in the disagreeable territory of Nebraska. I was not expecting that. Again, this is the first time I've read this. The disagreeable territory of Nebraska. In the United States, ain't that the truth? In virtue of my office as assistant professor in the Museum of Natural History in Paris, the French government had attached to me that expedition. After 6 months in Nebraska, I arrived in New York toward the end of March, laden with precious collection. My departure for France was fixed for the first days in May. Meanwhile, I was occupying myself in classifying my mineralogical, botanical, and zoological riches when the accident happened to the Scotia. I was perfectly up in the subject, which was the question of the day. How could I be otherwise? I had read and reread all the American and European papers without being any nearer a conclusion. This mystery puzzled me. Under the impossibility of forming an opinion, I jumped from one extreme to the other. That there really was something could not be doubted, and the incredulous were invited to put their finger on the wound of the Scotia. On my arrival at New York, the question was at its height. The hypothesis of the floating island and the unapproachable sandbank, supported by minds little competent to form a judgment, was abandoned, and indeed, unless this shoal had a machine in its stomach, how could it change its position with such astonishing rapidity? From the same cause, the idea of a floating hull of an enormous wreck was given up. There remained then only two possible solutions of the question, which created two distinct parties. On one side, those who were for a monster of colossal strength, on the other, those who were for a submarine vessel of enormous motive power. But this last hypothesis, plausible as it was, could not stand against inquiries made in both worlds. That a private gentleman should have such a machine as at his command was not likely. Where, when, and how was it built? And how could its construction have been kept secret? Certainly a government might possess such a destructive machine, and in these disastrous times when the ingenuity of man has multiplied the power or weapons of war, it was possible that, without the knowledge of others, a state might try to work such a formidable engine. After the chassis pots came the torpedoes. After the torpedoes, the submarine rams. Then the reaction. At least, I hope so. But the hypothesis of a war machine fell before the declaration of governments. As public interest was in question, and transatlantic communication suffered, their veracity could not be doubted. But how admit that the construction of this submarine boat had escaped the public eye? For a private gentleman to keep his secret under such circumstances would be very difficult, and for a state whose every act is persistently watched by powerful rivals, certainly impossible. After inquiries made in England, France, Russia, Prussia, Spain, Italy, and America, even in Turkey, the hypothesis of a submarine monitor was definitely rejected. Upon my arrival in New York, several persons did me the honor of consulting me on the phenomenon in question. I had published in France a work in quarto in 2 volumes entitled Mysteries of the Great Submarine Grounds. This book, highly approved of in the learned world, gained for me a special reputation in this rather obscure branch of natural history. My advice was asked. As long as I could deny the reality of the fact, I confined myself to a decided negative. But soon finding myself driven into a corner, I was obliged to explain myself categorically, and even the Honorable Pierre Aronnax, professor in the Museum of Paris, was called upon by the New York Herald to express a definite opinion of some sort. I did something. I spoke for want of power to hold my tongue. I discussed the question in all its forms, politically and scientifically, and I gave here an extract from a carefully studied article which I published in the number of the 30th of April. It ran as follows. After examining one by one the different hypotheses, rejecting all other suggestions, it becomes necessary to admit the existence of a marine animal of enormous power. The great depths of the ocean are entirely unknown to us. Soundings cannot reach them. What passes in those remote depths, what brings live or can live 12 or 15 miles beneath the surface of the waters, which is the organization of these animals, we can scarcely conjecture. However, the solution of the problem submitted to me may modify the form of the dilemma. Either we do know all the varieties of beings which people our planet, or we do not. If we do not know them all, if nature has still secrets in ichthyology for us, nothing is more comfortable to reason than to admit the existence of fishes or cetaceans of other kinds, or even of new species, of an organization formed to inhabit the strata inaccessible to soundings, and which an accident of some sort, either fantastical or capricious, has brought that at long intervals to the upper level of the ocean. If, on the contrary, we do know all living kinds, we must necessarily seek for the animal in question among those marine beings already classed, and in that case I should be disposed to admit the existence of a gigantic narwhal. The common narwhal, or unicorn of the sea, often attains a length of 60 feet. Increase its size 5-fold or 10-fold, give it strength proportionate to its size, lengthen its destructive weapons, and you obtain the animal required. It will have the proportions determined by the officers of the Shannon, the instrument required by the perforation of the Scotia, and the power necessary to pierce the hull of the steamer. Indeed, the narwhal is armed with a sort of ivory sword, a halberd, according to the expression of certain naturalists. The principal tusk has the hardness of steel. Some of these tusks have been found buried in the bodies of whales, which the unicorn always attacks with success. Others have been drawn out, not without trouble, from the bottoms of ships, which they had pierced through and through, as the gimlet pierces a barrel. The Museum of the Faculty of Medicine of Paris possesses one of these defensive weapons, 2 yards and a quarter in length, 15 inches in diameter at the base. Very well. Suppose this weapon to be 6 times longer and the animal 10 times more powerful. Launch it at the rate of 20 miles an hour, and you obtain a shock capable of producing the catastrophe required. Until further information, therefore, I shall maintain it to be a sea unicorn of colossal dimensions, armed, not with a halberd, but with a real spur, as the armored frigates or the rams of war, whose massiveness and motive power it would possess at the same time. Thus may this inexplicable phenomenon be explained. unless there is something over and above all that one has ever conjectured, even perceived or experienced, which is just within the bounds of possibility. These last words were cowardly on my part, but up to a certain point I wished to shelter my dignity as professor, and not give too much cause for laughter to the Americans, who laugh well when they do laugh. I reserved for myself a way of escape. In effect, however, I admitted the existence of the monster. My article was warmly discussed, which procured it a high reputation. It rallied round it a certain number of partisans. The solution it proposed gave, at least, full liberty to the imagination. The human mind delights in grand conceptions of supernatural beings, and the sea is precisely their best vehicle, the only medium through which these giants, against which terrestrial animals such as elephants or rhinoceros are as nothing, can be produced or developed. The industrial and commercial papers treated the question chiefly from this point of view. The Shipping and Mercantile Gazette, the Lloyd's List, the Packet Boat, and the Maritime and Colonial Review, all papers devoted to insurance companies which threatened to raise their rates of premium, were unanimous on this point. Public opinions had been pronounced. The United States were the first in the field, and in New York they made preparations for an expedition destined to pursue this narwhal. A frigate of great speed, the Abraham Lincoln, was put in commission as soon as possible. The arsenals were opened to Commander Farragut, who hastened the arming of his frigate, but as it always happens, the moment it was decided to pursue the monster did not appear. For 2 months no one heard it spoken of. No ship met with it. It seemed as if this unicorn knew of the plots weaving around it. It had been so much talked of, even with the Atlantic cable, that jesters pretended that this slender fly had stopped the telegram on its passage and was making the most of it. So when the frigate had been armed for a long campaign and provided with formidable fishing apparatus, no one could tell what course to pursue. Impatience grew apace when, on the 2nd of June, they learned that a steamer of the line of San Francisco from California to Shanghai had seen the animal 3 weeks before in the North Pacific Ocean. The excitement caused by this news was extreme. The ship was revictualled and well stocked with coal. 3 hours before the Abraham Lincoln left Brooklyn Pier, I received a letter worded as follows. To M. Aronnax. There's a train going by again. I believe the M is Mr., so I'm going to say that. To Mr. Aronnax, professor of the Museum of Paris, 5th Avenue Hotel, New York. Sir, if you will consent to join the Abraham Lincoln in this expedition, the government of the United States will with pleasure see France presented in the enterprise. Commander Farragut has a cabin at your disposal. Very cordially yours, J. B. Hobson, Secretary of Marine. Oh, and that is the end of chapter 2. So that was I don't know. I'm finding this to be a much more immediately interesting book than I ever expected. Because a lot of books from around this time period I have been told to read or encouraged to for school or, some other reason, and I usually found them pretty boring. I'm going to brush my beard for a second here. I find them pretty boring a lot of the time, but this, I don't know. I have read Moby Dick, most of it, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really fun book. I don't think I read it all cover to cover, but it was selections of it to kind of make it through a class for American literary history in college. And it was a lot of fun. It was really interesting. So I don't know if it's the maritime thing that's just got me interested in the same way, or if it's just more well written than I had anticipated. The the idea of starting out a book with this idea that there's a giant monster in the sea and people keep seeing it and they have no idea how it could be possible, I think is a really cool way to start out a book. So obviously, like, the action follows really quick. It follows the pattern of, like, a stranger comes to town. If you believe that there's only two types of stories, either a stranger comes to town or someone goes on a journey, the stranger has already come to town. The giant narwhal, or so they suspect it to be, has appeared, and now people are going to go on their journeys. They're going to go into this Abraham Lincoln vessel, which I'm guessing is a submarine, an early submarine if this is the 1860s, and pursue the giant narwhal, or whatever this creature is. Also, the train has just finished going by, so I'll drink a little more water and proceed to chapter 3 after talking about my book again. So the reason I do this Twitch streaming is to help advertise my book. I am a self-published author. I publish with Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing. My book, Withered Kingdom, is a fantasy novel about an angel who has lost the memories of his past life. And the only way he can regain them is by journeying through a world that's torn apart by war. It's an epic fantasy type of situation, as if Lord of the Rings had a magic system like Avatar: The Last Airbender and a plot like Bourne Identity. So I hope that interests somebody out there who ends up watching this, because I've poured a lot of my efforts into that book. It's been a really important part of my life, been a huge passion project, and again, it's called Withered Kingdom. It's by me, Nathan Thomas Orgel, and you can find it on, or I should say, Nathan Thomas Orgel, with my last name Orgel being spelled Orgill. That is one I often have to explain, just because it's a very unusual name. I believe it comes from the French word for pride. I'm not French, I'm mostly Scots-Irish, but like that's, I guess, where the name comes from. Anyway, you can search my name, Nathan Thomas Orgel, on Amazon, or you can just search Withered Kingdom. It should come up near the top, but you'll recognize it. I should have a copy around here. I thought I had one very nearby. I have business cards with a picture of it on it. Looks like... Oh, it's going to be mirrored, isn't it? Well, it looks like that, with the sword going through the crown. That is my book. You can buy it on Amazon. The paperback is, in the U.S. store, $12. I have priced the hardcover, which is brand new, just approved the hardcover, with Amazon. That's going to be $25, and the ebook is $4.99 technically, but $5 for all intents and purposes. And that you download through the Kindle app, or you buy on Amazon, and it delivers to any devices that you have the Kindle app on. So please check it out. And if you're not interested in fantasy books, tell people that you know. Supporting local authors, self-published authors, is a really big deal, because you're helping small businesses, you're helping local writers, and you're helping kind of improve people's appreciation for handmade, in a sense, handmade works. But yeah, that's my moment of self-promotion. I'm going to proceed to chapter 3 of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. Chapter 3. I Form My Resolution. 3 seconds before the arrival of J.B. Hobson's letter, I no more thought of pursuing the unicorn than of attempting the passage of the North Sea. 3 seconds after reading the letter of the Honorable Secretary of Marine, I felt that my true vocation, the sole end of my life, was to chase this disturbing monster, to purge it from the world. But I had just returned from a fatiguing journey, weary and longing for repose. I aspired to nothing more than again seeing my country, my friends, my little lodging by the Jardin Jardin des Plantes. I don't. It's probably French, and I'm terrible. My dear and precious collections. But nothing could keep me back. I forgot all fatigue, friends, and collections, and accepted without hesitation the offer of the American government. Besides, thought I, all roads lead back to Europe, and the unicorn may be amiable enough to hurry me toward the coast of France. This worthy animal may allow itself to be caught in the seas of Europe, for my particular benefit, and I will not bring back less than half a yard of his ivory halberd to the Museum of Natural History. But in the meanwhile I must seek this narwhal in the North Pacific Ocean, which, to return to France, was taking the road to the antipodes. Conseil, I called in an impatient voice. Conseil was my servant, a true, devoted Flemish boy who had accompanied me in all my travels. I liked him, and he returned the liking well. He was phlegmatic by nature, regular from principle, zealous from habit, evincing little disturbance at the different surprises of life, very quick with his hands, and apt at any service required of him, and, despite his name, never giving advice, even when asked for it. Conseil had followed me for the last 10 years wherever science led. Never once did he complain of the length or fatigue of a journey, never made an objection to pack his portmanteau for whatever country it might be, or however far away, whether China or Congo. Besides all this, he had good health, which defied all sickness, and solid muscles but no nerves. Good morals are understood. This boy was 30 years old, and his age to that of his master was 15 to 20. As 15 to 20. May I be excused for saying that I was 40 years old? But Conseil had one fault. He was ceremonious to a degree, and would never speak to me but in the third person, which was sometimes provoking. Conseil, said I again, beginning with feverish hands to make preparations for my departure. Certainly I was sure of this devoted boy. As a rule, I never asked him if it were convenient for him or not to follow me in my travels, but this time the expedition in question might be prolonged, and the enterprise might be hazardous in pursuit of an animal capable of sinking a frigate as easily as a nutshell. Here there was a matter of reflection, even to the most impassive man in the world. What did Conseil say? Conseil, I called a third time. Conseil appeared. Did you call me, sir? Said he, entering. Yes, my boy. Make preparations for me and yourself, too. We leave in 2 hours. As you please, sir, replied Conseil quietly. Not an instant to lose. Lock in my trunk all traveling utensils, coats, shirts, and stockings, without counting, as many as you can, and make haste. And your collections, sir? Observed Conseil. We will think of them by and by. What? The Archaeotherium, the Hyracotherium, the Oreodons, the Chaeropotamus, and other skins. They will keep them at the hotel. And your live Barbarossa, sir? They will feed it during our absence. Besides, I will give orders to forward our menagerie to France. We are not returning to Paris, then? Said Conseil. Oh, certainly, I answered evasively, by making a curve. Will the curve please you, sir? Oh, it will be nothing, not quite as so direct a road, that is all. We take our passage in the Abraham Lincoln. As you think proper, sir, coolly replied Conseil. You see, my friend, it has to do with the monster, the famous narwhal. We are going to purge it from the seas. The author of a work written in quarto, in 2 volumes, on the mysteries of the great submarine grounds, cannot forbear embarking with Commander Farragut. A glorious mission, but a dangerous one. We cannot tell where he may go. These animals can be very capricious. But we will go whether or no. We have got a captain who is pretty wide awake. I opened a credit account for Barbarossa, and Conseil following, I jumped into a cab. Our luggage was transported to the deck of the frigate immediately. I hastened on board and asked for Commander Farragut. One of the sailors conducted me to the poop, where I found myself in the presence of a good-looking officer who held out his hand to me. Monsieur Pierre Aronnax, said he. Himself, replied I. Commander Farragut? You are welcome, Professor. Your cabin is ready for you. I bowed and desired to be conducted to the cabin destined for me. The Abraham Lincoln had been well chosen and equipped for her new destination. She was a frigate of great speed, fitted with high-pressure engines, and admitted a pressure of 7 atmospheres. Under this, the Abraham Lincoln attained the mean speed of nearly 18 knots and a third an hour, a considerable speed, but nevertheless insufficient to grapple with this gigantic cetacean. The interior arrangements of the frigate corresponded to its nautical qualities. I was well satisfied with my cabin, which was in the after part, opening upon the gun room. We shall be very well off here, said I to Conseil. As well, by your honour's leave, as a hermit crab in the shell of a whelk, said Conseil. I left Conseil to stow our trunks conveniently away, and remounted the poop in order to survey the preparations for departure. At that moment, Commander Farragut was ordering the last moorings of the cast loose, which held the Abraham Lincoln to the pier of Brooklyn. So, in a quarter of an hour, perhaps less, the frigate would have sailed without me. I should have missed this extraordinary, supernatural, and incredible expedition, the recital of which may well meet with some skepticism. But Commander Farragut would not lose a day nor an hour in scouring the seas in which the animal had been sighted. He sent for the engineer. "Is the steam full on?" asked he. "Yes, sir," replied the engineer. "Go ahead," cried Commander Farragut. The quay of Brooklyn, and all that part of New York bordering on the East River, was crowded with spectators. 3 cheers burst successively from 500,000 throats. Thousands of handkerchiefs were waved from above the heads of compact mass, saluting the Abraham Lincoln until she reached the waters of the Hudson, at the point of the elongated peninsula which forms the town of New York. Then the frigate, following the coast of New Jersey along the right bank of the beautiful river, covered with villas, passed between the forts, which saluted her with their heaviest guns. The Abraham Lincoln answered by hoisting the American colors 3 times, whose 39 stars shone resplendent from the mizzen peak, then modifying its speed to take the narrow channel, marked by buoys placed under the inner bay, formed by Sandy Hook Point. It coasted the long sandy beach where some thousands of spectators gave it one final cheer. The escort of hosts of boats and tenders still followed the frigate, but did not leave her until they came abreast of the lightship, whose 2 lights marked the entrance of the New York Channel. 6 bells struck. The pilot got into his boat and rejoined the little schooner, which was waiting under our lee. The fires were made up, the screw beat the waves more rapidly. The frigate skirted the low yellow coast of Long Island, and at 8 bells, after having lost sight of the northwest of the lights of Fire Island, she ran at full steam onto the dark waters of the Atlantic. These are actually pretty pleasantly sized chapters. They're not too unwieldy to read. I hope my throat doesn't get too weary. I feel the tightness around here. I'll again take a moment to self-promote, because that's part of the reason that I even have this channel in the first place, or this Twitch account, is to advertise for my own book. I am a fantasy author, self-published. I use Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing, also known as KDP, to publish my novels. Only one of them is out right now. There's one I wrote a long time ago, but that was before I went to college and before I had really lived much of life, and I hadn't really learned a lot about writing yet. But it was a passion project then, and it's a passion project now because I really enjoy writing and I have a lot of story ideas. Withered Kingdom, my fantasy novel that is out now, I plan to write at least 5 sequels to it. I have 3 of them drafted, 4 of them drafted. Yeah. 3 of them drafted completely, and the 4th extensively, but not completely drafted. So Withered Kingdom is a fantasy story about an angel who has forgotten his past life and wants to find his own way to find peace in a world at war. But as the magical war closes in around him, he realizes that the only way he can survive is to make it to the other side of the battlefield, figuratively. I keep saying that and I don't want to miscommunicate what that means. It's a figurative idea that on the other side of the battlefield he will find peace. But things don't always go as planned, and Gia, the main character, ends up learning more about his past and his future at the same time than he ever imagined. So that is the story of Withered Kingdom. It is available right now on Amazon in 3 formats: a Kindle ebook, paperback, and hardcover. The hardcover is the most recent form. I just got that approved a few days ago, like 2 days ago. And I still haven't even seen it and held it in my hands yet, but very soon I will have a few of those copies. Excuse me. And I will be able to share that more with people around me, and hopefully more people will buy the hardcover than bought the soft cover or the ebook. It's important for me to advertise this, because if I don't, it just kind of sits there. It doesn't really get advertised on its own. The best way to sell a book is through my own words are failing me right now. Is through promotion by word of mouth. So, any of you watching this, please tell people that you know about a guy who's a small up and coming author, self-published author, with a fantasy story that people might be interested in. It's called Withered Kingdom. Again, it is available on Amazon, and that is the only place you can really buy it, unless you want to ask me personally, if you know me, for a copy, and I can give you one, even sign it. I would love to get more exposure and get into conventions eventually. I'll probably be speaking at a school here pretty soon about my author experience, and I might even get an interview with one of the local papers where I live. Other than that, it's more of a hobby at this point than a profession, although I do write a blog all the time, PhyronianChronicle.com, PHYRONI. I can't even. It's my own word. I made it up. PHRONIANCHRONICLE.com. PhyronianChronicle.com. That's the home of my blog, where I chronicle all of these videos that I do, all my Twitch streams and my Facebook live streams. I chronicle them all on there. I talk about pop culture, I talk about writing, I talk about books, talk about stuff that I've read. And I advertise my personal book, and there's links to buy my book on that website. So again, that's my big business, or my small business, I should say, that I'm trying to promote. If you are enjoying Nate Reads the Classics, and you don't have the money to buy the book, please share my posts from PhyronianChronicle.com, or anything you might find on my social media. Go ahead and follow, retweet, subscribe, like, comment, all the things that people always say to spread the word, because it would be huge for me, and you'd be helping out a small self-published author in a very big way. I will proceed now to Chapter 4, Nedland. of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. Captain Farragut was a good seaman, worthy of the frigate he commanded. His vessel and he were one. He was the soul of it. On the question of the cetacean there was no doubt in his mind, and he would not allow the existence of the animal to be disputed on board. He believed in it as certain good women believe in the Leviathan. Give me one moment. Just clearing some stuff on my phone here. The Leviathan, by faith, not by reason. The monster did exist, and he had sworn... Whoa. Computer's shutting off. That was using that for light. There we go. He believed in it as certain good women believe in the Leviathan, by faith, not by reason. The monster did exist, and he had sworn to rid the seas of it. He was kind of a knight of Rhodes, a second Dieudonné of de Gozon, going to meet the serpent which desolated the island. Either Captain Farragut would kill the narwhal, or the narwhal would kill the captain. There was no third course. The officers on board shared the opinion of their chief. They were ever chatting, discussing, and calculating the various chances of a meeting, watching narrowly the vast surface of the ocean. More than one took up his quarters voluntarily in the cross trees, who would have cursed such a berth under any other circumstances. As long as the sun described its daily course, the rigging was crowded with sailors, whose feet were burned to such an extent by the heat of the deck as to render it unbearable. Still the Abraham Lincoln had not yet breasted the suspected waters of the Pacific. As to the ship's company, they desired nothing better than to meet the Unicorn, to harpoon it, hoist it on board, and dispatch it. They watched the sea with eager attention. Besides, Captain Farragut had spoken of a certain sum of $2,000, set apart for whoever should first sight the monster, were he cabin boy, common seaman, or officer. I leave you to judge how eyes were used on board the Abraham Lincoln. For my own part, far my own part, I was not behind the others, and left to no one my share of daily observations. The frigate might have been called the Argus, for 100 reasons. Only one among us, Conseil, seemed to protest by his indifference against the questions which so interested us all. It seemed to be out of the keeping with the general enthusiasm on board. I have said that Captain Farragut had carefully provided his ship with every apparatus for catching the gigantic cetacean. No whaler had ever been better armed. We possessed every known engine, from the harpoon thrown by hand to the barbed arrows of the blunderbuss, and the explosive balls of the duck gun. On the forecastle lay the perfection of a breech loading gun, very thick at the breech, and very narrow in the bore, the model of which had been in the exhibition of 1867. This precious weapon of American origin could throw with ease a conical projectile of 9 pounds to a mean distance of 10 miles. Thus the Abraham Lincoln wanted for no means of destruction, and what was better still, she had on board Ned Land, the prince of harpooners. Ned Land was a Canadian, with an uncommon quickness of hand, who knew no equal in his dangerous occupation. Skill, coolness, audacity, and cunning he possessed in a superior degree, and it must be a cunning whale or a singularly cute cachalot to escape the stroke of his harpoon. Ned Land was about 40 years of age. He was a tall man, more than 6 feet high, strongly built, grave and taciturn, occasionally violent and very passionate when contradicted. His person attracted attention, but above all the boldness of his look, which gave a singular expression to his face. Who calls himself Canadian calls himself French, and little communicative as Ned Land was, I must admit that he took a certain liking to me. My nationality drew him to me, no doubt. It was an opportunity for him to talk, for me to hear, that old language of Rabelais, which was still in use in some Canadian provinces. The harpooner's family was originally from Quebec, and was already a tribe of hardy fishermen when this town belonged to France. Little by little, Ned Land acquired a taste for chatting, and loved to hear the recital of his adventures in the polar seas. He related his fishing and his combats with natural poetry of expression. His recital took the form of an epic poem, and it seemed to be listening and I seemed to be listening to a Canadian Homer singing the Iliad of the regions of the north. I am portraying this hardy companion as I really knew him. We are old friends now, united in that unchangeable friendship which is born and cemented amid extreme dangers. Ah, brave Ned! I ask no more than to live 100 years longer, that I may have time to dwell the longer on your memory. Now, what was Ned Land's opinion upon the question of the marine monster? I must admit that he did not believe in the unicorn, and was the only one on board who did not share that universal conviction. He even avoided the subject, which I one day thought it my duty to press upon him. One magnificent evening, the 25th of June, that is to say, 3 weeks after our departure, the frigate was abreast of Cape Blanc, 30 miles to leeward of the coast of Patagonia. We had crossed the Tropic of Capricorn in the Straits of Magellan, opened less than 7 miles to the south. Before 8 days were over, the Abraham Lincoln would be plowing the waters of the Pacific. Seated on the poop, Ned Land and I were chatting of one thing and another as we looked at this mysterious sea, whose great depths had up to this time been inaccessible to the eye of man. I naturally led up the conversation to the great unicorn, and examined the various chances of success or failure of the expedition. But seeing that Ned Land let me speak without saying too much himself, I pressed him more closely. "Well, Ned," said I, "is it possible that you are not convicted of the existence of the cetacean that we are following? Have you any particular reason for being so incredulous?" The harpooner looked at me fixedly for some moments before answering, struck his broad forehead with his hand, a habit of his, as if to collect himself, and said at last, "Perhaps I have, Mr. Aronnax. But Ned, you, a whaler by profession, familiar with all the great marine mammalia, you whose imagination might easily accept the hypothesis of enormous cetaceans, you ought to be the last to doubt under such circumstances." "That is just what deceives you, Professor," replied Ned, "that the vulgar should believe in extraordinary comets traversing space and in the existence of antediluvian monsters in the heart of the globe may well be, but neither astronomers nor geologists believe in such chimeras. As a whaler, I have followed many a cetacean, harpooned a great number, and killed several, but however strong or well armed they may have been, neither their tails nor their weapons should have been able to scratch iron plates of a steamer." "But, Ned, they tell of ships with the teeth of the narwhal have pierced through and through." "Wooden ships, that is possible," replied the Canadian, "but I have never seen it done, and until further proof I deny that whales, cetaceans, or sea unicorns could ever produce that effect you describe." "Well, Ned, I repeat it with a conviction resting on the logic of facts. I believe in the existence of a mammal powerfully organized, belonging to the branch of vertebrata, like the whales, the cachalots, or the dolphins, and furnished with a horn of defense of great penetrating power." "Hum," said the harpooner, shaking his head with the air of a man who would not be convinced. "Notice one thing, my worthy Canadian," I resumed. "If such an animal is in existence, if it inhabits the depths of the ocean, if it frequents the strata lying miles below the surface of the water, it must necessarily possess an organization, the strength of which would defy all comparison." "And why this powerful organization?" demanded Ned. "Because it requires incalculable strength to keep oneself in these strata and resist their pressure. Listen to me. Let us admit that the pressure of the atmosphere is represented by the weight of a column of water 32 feet high. In reality, the column of water would be shorter, as we are speaking of sea water, the density of which is greater than that of fresh water. Very well, when you dive, Ned, as many times 32 feet of water are as there are above you, so many times does your body bear a pressure equal to that of the atmosphere. That is to say, 15 pounds of each square inch of its surface. It follows then that at 320 feet, this pressure equals that of 10 atmospheres, of 100 atmospheres at 3,200 feet, and of 1,000 atmospheres at 32,000 feet. That is, about 6 miles. Which is equivalent to saying that, if you were to attain this depth in the ocean, each square 3/8 of an inch of the surface of your body would bear a pressure of 5,600 pounds. Ah, my brave Ned, do you know how many square inches you carry on the surface of your body? I have no idea, Mr. Aronnax. About 6,500, as in reality the atmospheric pressure is about 15 pounds to the square inch. Your 6,500 square inches bear at this moment a pressure of 97,500 pounds. Without my perceiving it? Without your perceiving it. If you are not crushed by the weight of a pressure that is, it is because the air penetrates the interior of your body with equal pressure. Hence perfect equilibrium between the interior and exterior pressure, which thus neutralize each other, and which allows you to bear it without inconvenience. But in the water it is another thing. Yes, I understand, replied Ned, becoming more attentive, because the water surrounds me but does not penetrate. Precisely, Ned, so that at 32 feet beneath the surface of the sea you would undergo a pressure of 97,500 pounds. At 320 feet, 10 times that pressure. At 3,200 feet, 100 times that pressure. Lastly, at 32,000 feet, 1,000 times that pressure would be 97,500,000 pounds. That is to say that you would be flattened as if you had been drawn from the plates of an hydraulic machine. The devil! Exclaimed Ned. Very well, my worthy harpooner. If some vertebrate, several hundred yards long, and large in proportion, can maintain itself in such depths, of those whose surface is represented by millions of square inches, that is, by tens of millions of pounds, we must estimate the pressure they undergo. Consider then what must be the resistance of their bony structure, and the strength of their organization to withstand such pressure. Why, exclaimed Ned Land, they must be made of iron plates 8 inches thick, like the armored frigates. As you say, Ned, and think what destruction such a mass would cause, if hurled with the speed of an express train against the hull of a vessel. Yes, certainly, perhaps, replied the Canadian, shaken well by these figures, but not yet willing to give in. Well, have I convinced you? You have convinced me of one thing, sir, which is that if such mammals do exist at the bottom of the seas, they must necessarily be as strong as you say. But if they do not exist, mine obstinate harpooner, how explain the accident of the Scotia? That's the end of that chapter. Take another quick break here. People explaining science in the 1800s had a very beautifully poetic way of doing it. Even if it was a lot of numbers, I feel like they knew in a much more effective way how to put it. I read, the last thing that I read for Nate Reads the Classics was The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. And I was very fascinated by the way the time traveler explained his understanding of how time works and how it could be altered and how people would perceive it and things like that. It's very interesting to me. People from this time period, how they presented science, how they understood it, and how they, the excitement, the fervor that they have about it is really fascinating and inspiring. It's like all the scientists back then were Bill Nye the Science Guy of their own time. And I think part of the reason this keeps coming up in literature has got to be that a lot of the writers, or maybe there was a general excitement over the developments of science happening in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and that people were just the developments in the understanding of science were being treated in a way that was more relatable and more understandable. Things could be explained, and people would follow it along better than, say, if someone tried to tell you in detail how an iPhone works. People would just be like, I don't know what a microprocessor is. I don't know how, stuff is happening on like a almost molecular level to calculate things and display stuff on a screen, and yet, that's just a regular part of our daily lives. Back in those days, back in the 1800s, building a giant ship out of steel was still like an incredible, incredible feat. But it was at least something that, you saw and you understood. You saw things being welded and riveted together, and, the whole process of the peak of science at the time was something that people could observe and be fascinated by without being overwhelmed at its mystery. There was obviously still a very mysterious effect going on for people. It was definitely going to surprise people that things were developing as they were, but it was relatable and explainable in a way that most people just take for granted nowadays. Like, we don't think much about how our cars work anymore, unless you're in the automotive industry. We don't really think much about how telecommunications work in 2022, because it's so convenient and so simple for us on our end that we don't need to know. If we have that curiosity as a child, we're not old enough to really understand all the big words that need to be used. But yeah, I really value and appreciate the literature of this time, because it's so cool to hear about, or to read what excited people and what was interesting in science at the time. Another train's about to go by. But yeah, it's cool. It's fun. I'm enjoying this book, and I hope you are too. Another book you might enjoy. There goes the train. Another book you might enjoy is a book that I wrote. It's called Withered Kingdom. It is a story of an angel who has forgotten his past life and tries to seek for a life of peace in a world torn apart by a magical war. The only way he's going to find that peace is by living through the tragedy and the hell that is war. And so his quest for peace and understanding and unlocking the mysteries of his past and the potential of his destiny are laid out for him, similar to how Bourne Identity how it was for Jason Bourne in the book Bourne Identity, or the movie Bourne Identity. I have never finished the book Bourne Identity, but I've read a lot of it, and I've watched the movie. So if you can imagine a world like Lord of the Rings with a magic system like Avatar: The Last Airbender, sprinkle in a little bit of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood with that magic, and have a plot about a hero learning about his past and discovering his future, that is my book, Withered Kingdom. It's written by me, Nathan Thomas Orgill. My last name, Orgill, spelled Orgill. If you were to search it on Amazon, and if you do search it on Amazon, you'll find it. The book is gray with a drawing of a sword going down through an inverted crown. It says Withered Kingdom on it, obviously. It says part 1 of the story of Gaia, or the rebirth of Gaia. That's what it actually says. I'm wrong. Yeah, the rebirth of Gaia. So it's a series that continues to follow this character, but Withered Kingdom is all that's been published for now, except for a book that I published more than 10 years ago, but you don't need to read that book to understand Withered Kingdom. Withered Kingdom is a self-isolated story that does have sequels to it. I have drafted several of them, and I would hope to get the second one out maybe this year, or maybe very early next year. But as it is right now, you can buy Withered Kingdom for about $5 through the Kindle app, $5 on the Kindle app. And then you can buy it for $12 as a paperback or $25 as a hardcover, premium hardcover from Kindle Direct Publishing. I should make a note that there is no dust jacket for Amazon's hardcover publishing. That might surprise some people because a lot of self-publishers still use dust jackets for hardcovers, but they're using case laminate instead. So I think it looks good. It looks like how Dungeons and Dragons books look now. 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. They just don't have dust jackets. They're just the case laminate. And it's, from what I understand, the Amazon ones are done pretty well. When I do get those first copies that I have ordered in of the hardcover, I will upload a video of it onto my blog on my website, FironianChronicle.com, which I'm going to read off my card again because I keep messing up. PHYRONIANCHRONICLE.com. FironianChronicle.com, the home of my blog, where I talk about pop culture, about reading and writing, and whatever else tickles my fancy, basically. But as things stand, I think I'm going to read chapter 5, and then I'm going to call it a night for this Twitch stream, because I don't know how much I can talk at once before I start losing my voice. And I think I'm getting close to that point. I've been at this at least an hour by now. I'm going to check something on my display here. Alright, never mind. Yes, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne, Chapter 5, Adventure. The voyage of the Abraham Lincoln was for a long time marked by no special incident, but one circumstance happened which showed the wonderful dexterity of Ned Land, and provided what confidence we might place in him. 30th of June, the frigate spoke some American whalers, from whom we learned that they knew nothing about the narwhal. But one of them, the captain of the Monroe, knowing that Ned Land had shipped on board the Abraham Lincoln, begged for his help in chasing a whale they had in sight. Commander Farragut, desirous of seeing Ned Land at work, gave him permission to go on board the Monroe. And fate served our Canadian so well that instead of one whale he harpooned two with a double blow, striking one straight to the heart and catching the other after some minutes' pursuit. Decidedly, if the monster ever had to do with Ned Land's harpoon, I would not bet in its favor. The frigate skirted the southeast coast of America with great rapidity. The 3rd of July we were at the opening of the Straits of Magellan, level with Cape Virgis. But Commander Farragut would not take a tortuous passage, but doubled Cape Horn. The ship's crew agreed with him, and certainly it was possible that they might meet the narwhal in this narrow pass. Many of the sailors affirmed that the monster could not pass there, that he was too big for that. The 6th of July, it's coming up on my birthday. The 6th of July, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Abraham Lincoln, at 15 miles to the south, doubled the solitary island, this last rock at the extremity of the American continent, to which some Dutch sailors gave the name of their native town, Cape Horn. The course was taken toward the northwest. The next day, the screw of the frigate was at least beating the waters of the Pacific. "Keep your eyes open," called the sailors, and they were opened widely. Both eyes and glasses, a little dazzled, it is true, by the prospect of $2,000, had not an instant's repose. Night and day they watched the surface of the ocean, and even nyctalopes whose faculty of seeing in the darkness multiplies their chances 100-fold, would have had enough to do to gain the prize. I myself, for whom money had no charms, was not the least attentive on board, giving but few minutes to my meals, but for a few hours to sleep, indifferent to either rain or sunshine. I did not leave the poop of the vessel. Now leaning on the netting of the forecastle, now on the taffrail, I devoured with eagerness the soft foam which whitened the sea as far as the eye could reach. And how often have I shared the emotion of the majority of the crew when some capricious whale raised its black back above the waves. The poop of the vessel was crowded in a moment. The cabins poured forth a torrent of sailors and officers, each with having breast and troubled eye watching the course of the cetacean. I looked and looked till I was nearly blind, while Conseil, always phlegmatic, kept repeating in a calm voice, "If, sir, you would not squint so much, you would see better." But vain excitement! The Abraham Lincoln checked its speed and made for the animal signaled, a simple whale or common cachalot, which soon disappeared amid a storm of execration. But the weather was good. The voyage was being accomplished under the most favorable auspices. It was then the bad season in Australia, the July of that zone corresponding to our January in Europe, but the sea was beautiful and easily scanned round a vast circumference. My contact is drying out. The 20th of July, the Tropic of Capricorn was cut by 105 degrees of longitude, and the 27th of the same month we crossed the equator on the 110th meridian. This passed, the frigate took a more decided westerly direction and scoured the central waters of the Pacific. Commander Farragut thought, and with reason, that it was better to remain in deep water and keep clear of continents or islands, which the beast itself seemed to shun, perhaps because there was not enough water for him, I suggested the greater part of the crew. The frigate passed at some distance from the Marquesas and the Sandwich Islands, crossed the Tropic of Cancer, and made for the China Seas. We were on the theater of that last diversions of the monster, and to say truth, we no longer lived on board. Hearts palpitated, fearfully preparing themselves for future incurable aneurysm. The entire ship's crew were undergoing a nervous excitement, of which I can give no idea. They could not eat, nor could they sleep. 20 times a day, a misconception or an optical illusion of some sailor, seated on the taffrail, would cause dreadful perspirations, and these emotions, 20 times repeated, kept us in a state of excitement so violent that a reaction was unavoidable. And truly, reaction soon showed itself. For 3 months, during which a day seemed an age, the Abraham Lincoln furrowed all the waters of the northern Pacific, running at whales, making sharp deviations from her course, veering suddenly from one tack to another, stopping suddenly, putting on steam, and backing ever and anon at the risk of deranging her machinery. And not one point of the Japanese or American coast was left unexplored. The warmest partisans of the enterprise now became its most ardent detractors. Reaction mounted from the crew to the captain himself, and certainly, had it not been for a resolute determination on the part of Captain Farragut, the frigate would have headed due southward. This useless search could not last much longer. The Abraham Lincoln had nothing to reproach herself with. She had done her best to succeed. Never had an American ship's crew shown more zeal or patience. Its failure could not be placed to their charge. There remained nothing but to return. This was represented to the commander. The sailors could not hide their discontent, and the service suffered. I will not say there was a mutiny on board, but after a reasonable period of obstinacy, Captain Farragut, as Columbus did, asked for 3 days' patience. If in the 3 days the monster did not appear, the man at the helm would give 3 turns of the wheel, and the Abraham Lincoln would make for the European seas. This promise was made on the 2nd of November. It had the effect of rallying the ship's crew. The ocean was watched with renewed attention. Each one wished for a last glance in which to sum up his remembrance. Glasses were used with feverish activity. It was a grand defiance given to the giant narwhal, and he could scarcely fail to answer the summons and appear. 2 days passed. The steam was at half pressure. 1,000 schemes were tried to attract the attention and simulate the apathy of the animal in case it could be met in those parts. Large quantities of bacon were trailed in the wake of the ship, to the great satisfaction, I must say, of the sharks. Small craft radiated in all directions round the Abraham Lincoln, as she lay to, and did not leave a spot of the sea unexplored. I'm getting a bit sore of sitting here this way. Give me a moment. Okay, where am I? The next day, the 5th of November at 12, the delay would, morally speaking, expire. After that time, Commander Farragut, faithful to his promise, was to turn the course to the southeast and abandon forever the northern regions of the Pacific. The frigate was then in 31 degrees 15 north latitude and 136 degrees 42 east longitude. The coast of Japan still remained less than 200 miles to leeward. Night was approaching, and they had just struck 8 bells. Large clouds veiled the face of the moon. Then, in its first quarter, the sea undulated peaceably under the stern of the vessel. At that moment I was leaning forward on the starboard netting. Conseil, standing near me, was looking straight before him. The crew, perched in the ratlines, examined the horizon, which contracted the darkness by degrees. Officers with their night glasses scoured the growing darkness. Sometimes the ocean sparkled under the rays of the moon, which darted between 2 clouds, then all trace of light was lost in the darkness. In looking at Conseil, I could see he was undergoing a little of the general influence. At least I thought so. Perhaps for the first time his nerves vibrated to a sentiment of curiosity. "Come, Conseil," said I, "this is the last chance of pocketing the $2,000. "May I be permitted to say, sir," replied Conseil, "that I never reckoned on getting that prize. And had the government of the United States government of the Union offered $100,000, I would have been none the poorer." "You are right, Conseil. It is a foolish affair after that, and one upon which we entered too lightly. What time lost, what useless emotions. We should have been back in France 6 months ago." "In your little room, sir," replied Conseil, "and in your museum, sir, and I should have already classed all your fossils, sir. And the Barbarossa would have been installed in its cage in the Jardin des Plantes, and have Jardin des Plantes? I don't know. And have been drawn all the curious people of the capital. As you say, Conseil, I fancy we shall run a fair chance of being laughed at for our pains." "That's tolerably certain," replied Conseil quietly. "I think they will make fun of you, sir, and, must I say it? Go on, my good friend." "Well, sir, you will only get your deserts." "Indeed. When one has the honor of being a savant as you are, sir, one should not expose oneself to—" Conseil had not time to finish his compliment. In the midst of general silence, a voice had just been heard. It was the voice of Ned Land shouting, "Look there! Look out there! The very thing we are looking for on our weather beam." That's the end of Chapter 5. Sounds like they've spotted it. So, yep, that's where I'm going to quit tonight. My voice is getting tired enough. My throat's a little sore. First 5 chapters of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. from the public domain. I read it on Google Books just now, which they have a scan of a physical copy from a library in like Virginia or something like that. Looks pretty old. The copy individually, not the book itself is definitely old. It's already over 100 years old to be in the public domain. But yeah, so my name is. There's another train going by. My name is Nathan Orgill, Nathan Thomas Orgill, last name spelled Orgill. Search it on Amazon, and you can find my book, Withered Kingdom, which is a fantasy novel about an angel who forgets his past, forgets his entire past life, and his only way to unlock the mysteries of his past and forge his way into his future is to go against his nature to find peace. His nature is to find peace, but he must go against it and fight in a massive magical war that rocks an entire world in order to find any peace. It is available now on Amazon. Withered Kingdom is the name again. It is available in the three formats that Kindle Direct Publishing lets you do. That is ebook. It's about $5 as an ebook. It is about $12. This is all US dollars in the Amazon.com store. Paperback is $12, and the hardcover, which is brand new, just released, is available for $25. If you do know me personally in some way, shape, or form, reach out to me on my social media or however you can, and I can look at finding a way to send you a signed copy if that's what you'd prefer. It will take me a while to get the copies because I'm waiting on the first few copies to be sent to me as it is. So that's me again, Nathan Thomas Orgill, author of Withered Kingdom. I do Nate Reads the Classics. I don't really have a schedule for when I come up to do these, but I am really enjoying 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So I'm going to continue reading more of it and maybe set up a daily schedule for it if I can, because it's a lot of fun to read this book, even if it wears my throat out. Yeah, if you do buy my book, you'd be helping me in a huge way. I will set up soon kind of like a tip jar on my website through my blog. My blog is phyronianchronicle.com. That's a word I made up, Phyronian. It's spelled Phyroninian, and then Chronicle, CHRONICLE.com. That's where you can find my blog and links to where to buy my book. You can do that all right now. And if you don't have the money, you can still help me out a lot by sharing my blog posts, commenting on them, liking them, visiting me on, here on Twitch whenever you can, visiting my channel on YouTube, which is Nathan T. Orgill Author. You can follow my Twitter at Nathan T. Orgill Author. I believe it's, Nathan T. Orgill, author. My Facebook business page, or my Facebook author page, is also Nathan T. Orgill Author. And, any of those would be hugely supportive for me. If you want to support self-published authors, if you want to self-publish yourself, you could be a huge help by, helping support other authors and, maybe return the favor in the future. Hopefully as soon as tomorrow I'll be able to be reading more of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I'm excited to find out what happens. And I don't really want to read ahead because I'm enjoying having natural reactions. The bit about Nebraska being a very unfortunate place to be, I thought was incredibly humorous, especially for a book much older than the author would have understood the way Nebraska is now. But I've driven through Nebraska from east to west, from east to west, and it is a really boring drive, a painfully boring drive. But thanks for joining. If you've joined live, if you watch this as video on demand, I really appreciate it as well. Every like, comment, chat post, follow, retweet, subscribe, everything you can do. My YouTube, my Twitter, my Facebook. I even have my LinkedIn profile, Nathan T. Orgel. I believe it's T. Orgel. It might be Nathan Thomas. I can actually check really quick. Nope, it's just Nathan Orgel. But hold on, let me get the white page back up. There we go. But yeah, any way you can follow me, any way you can subscribe, retweet, comment, share, like, every possible form of reaction helps encourage the algorithms to spread my work out to more people so I can sell more books. And, maybe someone out there wants me to read a classic book. It has to be more than 100 years old to be in the public domain. But if you just want to hear me read one, or you have to read one for school or something, and you would like to follow along in your reading with an audiobook, but you don't want to spend money on an audiobook either, I'll consider reading pretty much any English language public domain book. I have thought about starting a couple other Jules Verne books. I've thought about The Scarlet Letter, because I remember reading that. I might even just read through everything Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote. Everything I've read from him so far has been fantastic. Rip Van Winkle, I've thought about reading. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Boy. Maybe Mark Twain. I'm not sure about that. I know that Mark Twain is controversial enough as it is, but I wouldn't read Huckleberry Finn, because I just don't like Huckleberry Finn very much. And I like everything about Tom Sawyer better in every possible dimension, in every possible way. And I know that's some hot tea to say, but that's absolutely what I prefer. I like Tom Sawyer a lot better. I'm rambling a lot, so this is going to be the end of my stream. My voice is starting to hurt. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for joining in. See you next time.